Hello, everyone. Hey, if he's there, are you there,
Yeah.
Prescott? Oh,
Yes, I am.
awesome! Save the nick of time. Let me go. We read your bio. All right. Prescott Reavis is an Oakland-based spatial activist, designer, planner, and educator who has merged his 20 years of experience in architecture, planning, education to develop and construct inclusive communities throughout the nation with a focus on design equity and planning justice. Prescott's experience includes being an associate and director of student internships for internationally acclaimed design firm Ashland and Allen, now known as Stantec. He completed over 4 million square feet of an award-winning construction where he focused on healthcare and academic projects for 13 years. He's done so much stuff. He's a Howard alum. Let's see here. He moved to the Bay Area in 1999 to establish a new HLM office in San Francisco. While at HLM, Prescott completed the master's plan for the California Pacific Medical Center for San Francisco. But you've done a lot of work with children and nonprofits, and your urban, where is it? Let's call it here the project manager for the nationally recognized nonprofit architecture community planning in San Francisco, where he provides community engagement, planning, design services, and advocacy for nonprofits, small businesses, and community-based organizations. So you've done a lot of things. So I think what we should do right now, because everybody can read what you've done. We can all look you up on Google. What got you into space?
It just kind of just an interest, really probably seeded from my parents. I grew up in upstate New York, and we would frequently travel back down to where my parents lived. My parents grew up right outside New York City in both Rockland County and Westchester County. But we spent a lot of time in New York City. I probably in New York City, every other month or so. So I really kind of got to love cities. And even when I went to college, I determined that I really had to be in a major metropolitan area. And kind of once I got to being in DC and being in a city every single day, moving around on the public transportation, walking, seeing the active life, it just, I just was like, this is for me to really, focus in on, things that affect urban spaces, and more importantly, how it affects people.
Mm-hmm. Especially, being in New York, you really get to see how people utilize space. I'm a California native, Los Angeles, and for me, the difference between New York and LA was how effectively people in New York use space.
Yes.
In LA, it's like, I told people, I'm like, in Los Angeles, you could die and no one would know because there's so much space. But here, I remember moving to the East Coast and having to get used to, even in restaurants, being close to people and being on the subway and being like in the space with people, not wasting any of that space. So, to go from just what space is, what is spatial justice? Because the thing is that some people use that term. It's not as kind of like a popular term as some other terms. What is spatial justice to you?
Well, spatial justice means a whole bunch of things. It's a loaded question you just gave me. The first and foremost, I think it's really about equity in, accessible of spaces, but also quality of spaces. And so if we really think about that in a perspective of, particularly in Black neighborhoods, most Black neighborhoods have an inequitable amount of bad spaces, or spaces that you generally don't want to hang out or don't want to be in, that are a lot of times could be underutilized or not even there. And so the idea is of thinking about how do we actually create spaces that are accessible, friendly, safe, but also honor and respect the cultural components of that particular neighborhood, and is not determined by outside forces. So spatial equity is thinking about how do we actually create park systems, community park systems, libraries, streetscapes, that not necessarily look the same, but are the same quality. Mm-hmm. Is when I really think about when I'm talking about spatial justice, and more importantly about who actually has a right to actually occupy those spaces. As we've seen a lot in the United States over the last couple of years and really last couple of months, there seems to be a lot more proliferation of people that basically feels they have the right to police public space. And that's only if there's something going on that's menacing, not simply as you've probably seen in Oakland recently, that we had Barbecue Becky, and then also most recently we had Jogger John, of these people who think that they have the authority to control space, and it's not up to them to control space, especially when you're doing things that are legal, or at least have been sanctioned to be legal, maybe not by the books. And so that's a big thing about spatial equity or spatial justice. That is really the idea I'm working within.
No, I mean, that's very true. I mean, actually, I have to say, I love when I talk to somebody and they get what I'm talking about. Like, I don't have to like pull it out of them. Like, what do you, you get what I'm saying? So, I mean, you already explained my next question was how does spatial justice relate to Oakland? But do you have any, like, other than the Barbecue Becky and the jogger, I mean, do you have any other specific like examples, or just how how does spatial justice relate to Oakland outside of those incidents that we know about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the wonderful project that I've got re-engaged in earlier this year is what we're calling the Black Cultural Zone in Oakland, which is focused really on East Oakland. And the idea is bus rapid transit is coming down through the main corridor in East Oakland, which is known as International Boulevard. I mean, it's been to Oakland, and specifically East Oakland, will know International Boulevard. As the connecting tissue really of Oakland, from Lake Merritt all the way to the border of San Leandro, which is the city to the south of Oakland. And so BRT has been coming down. It's actually being built right now. And as part of that, as we know, with any major public transportation infrastructure project that happens in Black neighborhoods, gentrification is going to occur. Even though they say, oh, no, there's really no correlation. You can go back into time and see this. And so, luckily, there were several organizations that already had some forethought of this before I even became involved in this. So this is really where we have community understanding really how space works, and more importantly, how infrastructure works. So Eastside Arts Alliance is really the main organization that thought of this idea of creating these first, it was really a Black cultural nodes along the International Boulevard close to certain BRT stops, but then it morphed into actually creating a whole Black cultural corridor, and then really looking at kind of where can there be certain zones that are really about Black people. And when I'm saying that, what I mean is really think about how can these be places that lock in Black history, Black ownership, and Black space to be Black in perpetuity. And so what that's meaning is that you have to identify where the Black properties that are already owned, and more importantly, looking at what are the vacant and underutilized spaces, and how do you actually create economics as well as also finances and a cohesion to actually buy more of these spaces and to develop them out with Black dollars and create Black businesses, like I said before, being there in perpetuity. And so that's really one of the actually the most interesting project I'm working on, and really has a lot of great other organizations that are in it, like the Eastside Collective, as well as the Dellums Institute. And there's a whole bunch of sub pieces to it, but it's really what I just told you about are the main focuses.
That's wonderful. I mean, because that's another thing I was going to ask you about, the Black Cultural Zone, because I kept seeing that on the social media. Like, what's this Black Cultural Zone? How can we get one in New Jersey? Another thing I want to know about is the project pipeline, which I love the name of it, because I think so many times, like, anything that's connected to our community gets pathologized and becomes like this negative thing. So what's the project pipeline?
So the project pipeline is an initiative by the National Organization of Minority Architects to introduce young people into the profession of architecture as early as middle school is the original intent. Now we're actually working with elementary school students, because if you look at the numbers of licensed Black architects in the country, they roughly make up about 2 to 3% of the entire architecture profession, which comes to be right around 3,500 licensed Black architects in the country. And then if we focus in specifically talking around women architects, I think we're around 425 licensed Black women architects in the entire United States. So the idea of Project Pipeline is to introduce the students early on to the profession and doing it through various different processes. It can be either through camps, which we in San Francisco host a 1-week camp. It can range from a 1-day camp to all the way, like I said, to a 1-week camp that we do. There's 2-day camps, 3-day camps, and then also workshops where you engage young people on different aspects of the profession. So that's what Project Pipeline is about.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so important because, how your community is designed, the future of the community is designed like 30 years, 20 years out. And so if we don't have people who are thinking about, well, I want to design for our community, you're going to not, coming in like at the end, like the tail end, these projects aren't like a year in the making. They're 10 years in the making. They're 20 years in the making. So to have people like thinking like, oh, let's have these kids like think about, I want to have a career in urban planning is so important. And I think it's, people like you are so important. Like I know you have, a saying called Black Design Matters, and that probably ties into the Black cultural zone. But does that take into account just designing with Black people in mind, or actually Black designers themselves?
It's both, and Black Design Matters actually came before I got involved with the Black Cultural Zone, and it really was kind of my response to that Black Lives Matter, and I was like, well, I love that saying, and then also so. I guess for probably about the last 7 years now, when we get to February, what I do is every day I post through all my social media accounts, Black architects. I usually do 2 to 3 a day, basically giving people history and understanding that Black architects and Black planners have been part of the history and narrative of the profession of architecture for a long time. Mm-hmm. And it's particularly in America is really where it's focusing on. And so I highlight these architects, that the work that they've done both those who have passed on and those who are really kind of the hot architects now or young architects now that are doing some really good work. And so that's where it came about, was the Black Design Matters, was really, to basically say that, we've been here, we've been doing the work, and we're doing really quality work is the most important thing. That's where a lot of the professions say, well, we can't give Black designers, the work because they can't perform. Well, that's very contrary to the history of it. I mean, if we look at the work that's done with the National African American History Museum, we all know how everybody loves that, and that's done by a Black team. That was done by 3 Black architects originally, came together to formulate that. And these were rock stars of Black architects, even though one of them is not an American architect. It's still the idea that it was a Black design, which is very rare to see in America, Black design, but it's done by all other cultural groups. We see in Latino cultures and districts, they bring in their own people. We definitely see it in the Jewish community. Like, have you ever seen a Jewish museum done by anybody besides a Jewish architect? Mm-hmm. So, these are the things that, when I talk about Black Design Matters, I'm really looking at, if we really want to create Black communities, who is best suited to culturally understand the design process and then also the historical issues that have screwed over Black communities, but Black designers and Black architects and Black planners. So we're the ones who really need to be the ideologists and the people that ultimately work to produce Black communities.
That is, that to me is so important, because I think so many times what we do becomes just like, oh, it could be just anybody could do it. There's nobody specific. I'm even like kind of wondering at this time, we have the APA, the AIA in regards to architecture, and I know that you were one of the founders of the San Francisco Minority Architects, National Architects it's the San Francisco branch, correct?
It's the San Francisco chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects, correct?
Yes. And was that out of this idea that, you don't need to, that Black people, that people of color can create their own kind of like organization that goes, this is okay, this is not okay? Because I think in a way, we still have another problem where, who gets to say who is okay? And in regards to the standards, I mean, do you think that, we need to start coming up with our own standards can we do that? We're at that point that we could come up with our own standards in regards to architects and spatial justice. Like, how they have like APA standards. Can we have, is this standard like, culturally competent? I don't know if that's a question.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely relevant, but I think that when it comes down to something like that, what it really needs to be focused in on is that really about what does Black mean in that particular neighborhood. And so you could maybe have a general national standard, but it really comes down to kind of the localvorism. What is really the flavor and feel of that local area? And this kind of goes back to the idea that really you have to build off of what was there in the past and, what worked well there, because, what might be defined as, a Black neighborhood in Oakland might not be defined as a Black neighborhood in Washington, D.C. or where I grew up in Albany, New York. And kind of what are those pieces that they would consider would make up a Black neighborhood and kind of even define as a neighborhood. But could there be certain cultural competencies that are put in place for any designer to come in? Yes. And actually, there's an architect that's already started doing that actually in New York, Jack Travis, who is kind of like the one of the main deans of Black architects, and he's been a person that's talked about what is a Black design philosophy, a Black design aesthetic, and so Jack has actually come up with these competencies that actually determine what are Black design.
I'm definitely have to look him up. And also, let me move your camera over just a little bit so I can make sure I see you the other way. All right, I know me the other way. Okay. All right, right there. Okay, because you were like starting to move out the frame. You were like getting into what you were talking about. That's good. I know you went to Howard. Do you think? I mean, the thing is that I've talked to quite a few people who are in outer space, and they've gone to historically Black colleges. Do you think that has shaped your consciousness in regards to not just being an architect, being in design, being in the field, but also kind of having this like, I'm designing and keeping Black people in mind? Do you think Howard had anything to do with that, or that was already there before?
It was there before, but it was definitely strengthened and expanded it being at Howard. I mean, that's the greatness and that's the reason why I wanted to go to a historically Black college, was really to be in a place where there's a lot of good Black thinkers, where like you weren't ostracized for being a Black intellect, but almost like you're almost shunned if like you didn't get something there at Howard, which was awesome, because it's like everybody wanted to elevate their game. And that was the great thing of being there. But then also just being around that rich legacy. And from being in a design field, it was also really important that you have professors that are open to, of pushing your own aesthetic, that if it has a Black aesthetic that you're trying to push, that it's very supportive, not going, well, what's a Black aesthetic? You can't do that in a white university, because a white university would be like, well, what's a Black aesthetic? And you don't have time to explain to them this. You would take your 4 or 5 years after they explain this to them, and you would never even finish your degree. But, when you're at a historically Black college, that's something that the majority of the faculty already gets. That's why they're there. Because they want to create Black space. They want to create where intellectual Black thought can thrive in a place, and also where it can be highly contested, which is even more important, so that when you bring it out to outside of the Black community, it's been vetted. And that's really the value of going to a historically Black college, is that you're around these people that just have a lot of amazing ideas and thoughts, and you build off of all of them, and then you continue the ideology of what all historically Black colleges have, and that's to produce graduates that can go out and help Black communities.
That is true. That's true. That's wonderful, because I went to a PWI, predominantly white institution, and I found myself having to explain, like, what's Afrofuturism? What's Afro-surrealism? Just what is Blackness? Before I could even do anything. So it was great that you were able to do that and kind of develop yourself. Now, I'm going to ask you kind of what's your favorite space or building, and why? And that could mean anything, whatever you want it to mean.
Wow, that's a hard one. I think actually one of my favorite spaces is actually one that's less built out. And when I also think about that, it's less built out spaces. I like to spend a lot of time in nature. So probably about 5 minutes from my house is the MLK waterfront in Oakland. And that's a space I actually really enjoy, because it's just natural. It's got these beautiful walking paths that hardly any people in Oakland, now they're all going to know about it, you go down and use. but it's just a great place for reflection that I can, you've got this wetland there, and then if you look beyond, you see San Francisco and beyond, and then if I look to the right, I kind of see the hills of Marin County. So it's a really kind of connective place too, that kind of connects you back to like the entire Bay Area. But it's also one of the points that's really important, that a project I worked on earlier this year. It kind of is a connection of the San Leandro Creek, which is also a spot where the Ohlone Indians also had laid their base. So when I speak of this idea of connection, it's really that connection of, when I'm there, I feel like I'm connected back to the original people of that space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's why it's really important.
No, it is, it's remembering who people are is a very important thing. Now, I know that you serve on the Community Advisory Board for the Oakland Downtown Specific Plan. And I know that you guys have a racial equity focus for the proposal. And why did you do that? Why did you feel that was important?
Oh, it wasn't like, why do I feel like, it's like the people told the city that this is an issue. They looked at the specific plan when it was going through. Well, first of all, let's talk about the process a little bit.
Okay.
So the process when it happened, and the planning team that they brought in was really the problem. They brought in a planning team that was from Florida, from a suburban part of Florida, number one, not even Miami. And two, they, and this is really kind of a hang up more on me personally, they brought in new urbanists. And so when you bring in new urbanists, they already kind of have an idea of what they want to do. It's kind of very templated. And so, you can't do that in Oakland. Oakland ain't a template for anything. When you come to Oakland, you have to be thinking about what is Oakland need, and specifically dive into those parameters. And so when they were working through the process and trying to have these meetings and talking to, and their ideas are coming forth, they're like, these don't make sense for Oakland. I don't see anything that's talking about trying to preserve Black culture, Black history, Black businesses. And so there was an uprising by the community. Mm-hmm. Thank God the city heard this and basically said, we need to kind of step back and think about when we're doing, planning now, how do we really look at about who's actually going to benefit from this, and who are the players who are not in the room that need to be in the room and really be thought about and written into the program. And so the racial equity component is really thinking about not only for the downtown plan, but for any future planning that the city is doing, about how do you do it in a way that helps to preserve those who are already there, as well as welcome those who are coming in, and allow the equality of life to work for everybody, and really more importantly, the economics to work for everybody. Because you can have equality all you want, but if you're not making the same dollars and can't bring in the same type of money, ultimately inequity is going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the larger framework, is looking about how do we preserve the richness and continue to build on the richness of the racial diversity that we have in the city of Oakland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I wish more cities would actually do that for real instead of, pretend. Another thing I noticed that you decided to go back and get your master's in urban planning at San Jose State. So why, you have all this experience. Why did you decide to do that?
Really, because I was kind of acting as a planner without really understanding what the hell a planner does, to be quite honest with you. And then the second reason is I wanted to understand, as I was working more and more in architecture, I realized that it was the planning and policies that were setting things in place to create bad neighborhoods, bad buildings. And there's only so much you can do with architecture to mitigate bad planning. And so my thought process was, if I learn how to plan really well and understand policies, I can help to shape those, and also to be able to teach young people about planning and policy making already at those young ages, so they can start to shape their neighborhoods and shape the policies. And so it was really more for them more than anything else, so that I could teach them. And through that process, I kind of got a lot more into it, and just started talking to people, and showing up to a lot more planning meetings, and people like, oh, well, you seem to know something, so why don't you sit on this board, or why don't you come talk to this person about what's going on here? And specifically, really happened actually with the BRT. I remember this, I guess, when they were doing the planning about, 6-7 years ago. I went to a meeting, and they started talking, and whoever the planner was up there that was given the the spiel. I kept asking him all these questions. He's like, "You seem to know a lot." And then when people were shouting out ideas, I would keep building on him. He's like, "Well, why don't you just run the rest of the meeting?" I'm like, "Are you serious?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, Everybody seems more comfortable with you running the meeting than me." And I was like, "Okay, if you want me to do that, I'll hop in and do that." And so it's just kind of been something that I really more or less fell into by going to school to learn a lot more and actually feel more connected and empowered to speak on a lot of issues that I think other people don't feel they have a right to speak on. And I can be that voice that actually creates the space for them to feel comfortable to be able to speak on it.
Yeah, that's very important. So what advice would you give other Black cities that are currently gentrifying? And what advice would you give to Black cities that just, they're just in the middle of the country somewhere and no one's interested in them? What would you give them in regards to architecture and history, like urban planning? What advice? I mean, I know it's kind of a big question, but
Well, first I would document it, and one of the key things that with, unfortunately with us as Black people is we still like to do everything orally, and I'm one of those people too. Mm-hmm. And so we need to document the Black businesses there, the great Black people there, great Black homes. And that was one of the things when I was in Portland that was really nice. I work with an organization called Bosco Milligan Foundation, doing volunteer work for them, and they had this program called Homeworks. And what they did, they would go into the Black neighborhoods in Portland, and they would work with elementary school students to teach them about all the Black people who lived in those neighborhoods, and that really helped to create those neighborhoods. And then they would do a walking tour through the neighborhoods to point these people houses out or their businesses out that still, it might be there or might not be there. But more importantly, they would connect them with basically the oral historians that still lived in the neighborhoods, and they would drop the knowledge onto them. So a lot of those things are kind of what you want to do, I would say, for cities is create that narrative. So when people want to come in and want to kill off a building or destroy a neighborhood, like, no, this has a rich cultural history and we have it documented, so you can't do that. So what we can do is you can add things, but we're not going to start anew because there's already so much richness and history here. And that's the most important thing is to build off that history, acknowledge it, and not say that it's something that's a forgotten past, because there's always a legacy in every city, especially a Black legacy in every major city that people don't want to talk about. And that's the key thing is we need to bring it to the forefront and build on it, because that can be the economic generator that helps to create and to continue Black neighborhoods.
Yeah, you're so right. That's so important. I mean, that's part of what, the reason why I do this show, to kind of document and kind of give a map to other people. Like, this is who's here. When people kind of go, "Oh, well, there aren't any Black architects or urban planners or this or whatever, or engineers." I'm like, yes, there are here. But not even for even for the community. My this work is what I do is for the community though. So I have another question. This is kind of a fun question. How can we tie this all into skiing?
Oh, well, I mean, skiing is actually what really got me a lot more love for, planning. Visiting, way out places, in the middle of nowhere, and seeing how they're planned out. When you're in Idaho, like why else are you going to be driving around through Idaho really for any reason, as a Black person, except to be going to a huge ski convention for Black people. But also skiing has also allowed me to take trips outside of the country on other people's dollars. Like the first time I went outside of the country was to do research for my undergrad thesis. And I went to the Scandinavian countries, and that was paid on somebody else's dollars that I was doing an internship. And so, and my thesis project for my undergrad was a ski training academy for the National Brotherhood of Skiers, which, if you don't know, is the largest Black organization in the world for Black skiers.
No, I did not know that. But yes, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for letting me know. Because I had to. You had so much about skiing in there, and you have a picture of yourself with your ski stuff on, so I had to ask you about it. But thank you so much for visiting Black Kids in Outer Space. We appreciate your work, and we look forward to the work that you do in the future, and also to the people that you inspire, the young people that you inspire, and see what they do. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and also this thank you for having this space. It's the awesome space you have, and I appreciate everything you do too.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.